It took the form of a major aerial and ground offensive, which the Israelis claim is an operation against Palestinian militants in the refugee camp at Jenin. The official statement from the Israeli government mentions an extensive counter-terrorism effort. But the Palestinian authorities say it is an invasion and a war crime. Now, in a moment, we'll have a powerful report by our correspondent Yolande Knell from Jenin. But it might be useful, first of all, to move to the screen over there to remind ourselves of the extremely challenging circumstances, to put it mildly, which have shaped this region's politics now for decades. Let's go back to the 1960s, because the Israeli occupation of the West Bank here began in 1967, when Israeli forces captured and occupied the territory. At that time, it was ruled by Jordan. Now, the West Bank includes the Palestinian cities of Hebron and East Jerusalem, Ramallah, Nablus and Jenin. That's what we're talking about tonight, where the latest attacks have taken place. At least 8 Palestinians have been killed, more than 50 injured. The number of dead is likely to rise. The operation is ongoing. There were multiple drone strikes on buildings, and more than 1,000 Israeli troops entered the city and its refugee camp. The UN Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, has expressed his deep concern about these latest developments. So we'll start tonight with this report by our Middle East correspondent, Yolande Knell, in Jenin.
The day ended as it had begun in Jenin, with battles raging. The Israeli military had used a surprise drone strike in the early hours to target what it said was the headquarters of local militants. Armed Palestinians began fighting back from inside the city's crowded, decades-old refugee camp. Hundreds of Israeli soldiers are on the ground. The Israeli military says they're seizing weapons and explosives. The Israeli Prime Minister said action was overdue.
The Israeli Defence Force began an extensive operation last night against terrorism in Jenin. In recent months, Jenin has become a haven for terrorism. We're putting an end to it.
Palestinian medics have been struggling to reach the dozens of injured. Israel says it's acting on precise intelligence and doesn't seek to harm civilians, but many have been caught in the crossfire.
What's going on in the refugee camp is real war. There were strikes from the sky targeting it. Every time we drive in with our ambulances, we come back full with injured people.
You get those cracks of gunshot coming from the Jenin refugee camp, which is just up there on the hill. Sometimes we get loud explosions as well. Even though the Israeli military has said this is a closed zone, we're not allowed as journalists to get any closer. You can really get a sense from here of just how intense the fighting is. Israeli security forces released these pictures showing them rounding up suspected militants. In recent months, many Palestinians who've carried out deadly attacks on Israelis have come from this area. Others have hid here. And even before today, Jenin's seen repeated deadly Israeli army raids. Palestinian officials say enough is enough.
We are again calling the international world to provide urgent international protection to our people and impose penalties against the occupation regime.
And tonight, while this military operation isn't over yet, there was a reprieve for some Palestinian families. The Israeli military allowing them to leave the camp. Some raising their hands or waving makeshift white flags in a gesture of surrender.
Well, that was Yolande reporting from Jenin. She's in Jerusalem tonight and joins us now. Any sense of the stage of this operation, Yolande, and how long it's likely to last?
Well, they've told us that the initial stage of the operation is over, but the Israeli military says it's not going to talk about how long this could go on for. It will go on for as long as needed. The Israeli media, speculating about the fact that could mean 1 or 2 days more. I mean, just to bring you up to date on what's been happening in the last couple of hours, we know from the Palestinian Red Crescent now that it was about 500 Palestinian families that were allowed to leave the camp earlier, although some people told us that men and teenagers teenage boys were detained by Israeli soldiers, that they were kept behind. My colleagues still in Jenin say they've been seeing more Israeli military jeeps now heading towards the camp. That has raised expectation that there could be a night of intense fighting ahead. Now, if you look at politically what's going on, there's been a lot of pressure from the far right in the Israeli government for this to be the start of a bigger military operation across the West Bank. The Israeli foreign minister earlier, though, spoke to journalists and said that that wasn't expected to be the case. This was very much focused on Jenin, he said, but still there'll be concern, I think, about a wider Palestinian response. There's lots of anger about what's happening, and already protests have spread to Gaza.